welcome back to the Voices of Future Generations Children's Story Building webinars. We're back with a bang. And why is Ms. Shama so excited and so hyper today? Well, we have been through an immensely wonderful, rewarding journey through cycle 1 and have finally ended up holding our very first anthology. So boys and girls, a big round of applause for the VOFG team and the kids who wrote these stories. We are immensely proud of all our 20 shortlisted child authors for cycle 1 who got their stories published in our very first anthology, Young Voices of Arabia. So today's webinar is all about the power of dialogues and how important dialogues are in progressing or advancing your story plot. So today we're going to talk all about that. But before I start, of course, our rules for the webinar, please, there is no shame in asking a question. Ask as many questions as possible. You need to participate with a purpose. And of course, now I've shown you the evidence of what happens when you participate with a purpose. And of course, respect every voice, because every story in this anthology has a unique voice. Every child writing the story will have their own style of presenting their point of view. So we are looking for diversity. We are looking for different kinds of voices. Today's webinar, of course, also has got our thinking question, which is what makes dialogues memorable? A dialogue is really, really important with relevance to advancing the story plot. Now, you know that the story action is happening, the characters are a part of the story, and of course, something has to move the story forward. And yes, you can have the story narration to take the story forward, but if you want to make the narration interesting, then you want to add in dialogues. And dialogues are quite an important part of fiction writing, which is what our competition is all about. You're creating an imaginative story, a creative story out of your imagination, and therefore the characters are going to converse with each other and they'll always have something to say. Now that way dialogues are very important. Then of course, they share the opinions, they tell us a lot about the characters. So a dialogue coming from a character can say a lot about the character. If you want to understand characters, if you want to understand their personalities, then what they say and what they think and what they do all contribute towards understanding characters. So when you want to understand characters, reading their dialogues or writing their dialogues thoughtfully can create a very interesting character, okay? It brings out the character's reaction in a moment. So when your character is part of, let's say, a very interesting action sequence, and they are in a space where something has just happened and they are reacting to it, what they say at that point of time through the story will tell us a lot about your character. So dialogues are very thoughtfully put into the story. They're not something that you create randomly. You have to keep many things in mind when you are sharing, things about your character or what your character is saying. Dialogues are extremely integral to how we want to present our characters, okay? Dialogues help set characters apart. So if you've got two characters in your story and you want to set them apart and create distinct personalities for them, then dialogues can help you a lot. Because one of your characters might be a very chatty person, a person who really talks a lot and is very talkative. And so they could be a character who are always coming in between conversations and always have something to say. And you can show the annoyance of another character by showing that they have a very shy and introvert personality because they always get offended or angry with this person because they are so talkative. So the way you present your dialogues and the choice of words that you use truly sets your characters apart. So dialogues are really important to the story plot. Character building and dialogues. Now, dialogues help the reader understand the power dynamics. Now, this might be a new concept to you, so I want you to pay attention. We're first going to read the example I've shared on the screen with you, okay? You have two characters. One who is very loud and pushy, while the other who easily gives in. In an argument, the dialogue that happens between them will clearly show us who is more powerful in their relationship, who controls the dialogue. This is an important word, okay? Now let's look at the dialogue here. I am not dropping this design for sure, Mike. This by far is one of the best ideas shared in the meeting. I've never come across a better suggestion. Definitely not taking no for an answer. Now, clearly, this person's personality comes across a certain way. I'm going to ask you in the chat in a while, but let me read the other person now. I wish we could, discovery number 2. I wish we could discuss some more, Adam. I'm still trying to understand. That's the problem with you, Mike. You take too long to understand. I am ready for action. We can explain it to you later. Let's move, guys. Now, when you look at that dialogue, let me know, what do you understand? The person in red and the person in green, how are their personalities distinct? Can anyone tell me? Let's discuss the person in red first. What do you think of their personality? What are your ideas about their personality? Okay. The person is argumentative, impatient, fast, pushy, a little harsh, determined. That's a good word. All right. Mad, angry, bossy. That's a good word. Bossy. What else? The person in red is harsh and loud. Argumentative, confident. I like that choice of words as well, because sometimes people who are pushy can be very confident as well. Furious, rude, aggressive, good word. Bold, good word. Spoiled, okay, we can't make that out much yet. Outspoken, good choice. Assertive, very well done. Outspoken. Okay, what about the guy in green? What can we say about the character in green? What does that tell you? Shy, kind, slow, calm, thoughtful, kiddish, okay, polite, introvert, good choice, cautious, good choice, controlled, timid, polite, meek, naive, calm, so many words. Well done, kids. I'm very proud of you. Yes, so by just reading that dialogue, you can clearly distinguish the difference between the two personalities. And normally in a story, the person who is more assertive, the person who is loud, the person who is more, controlling, is the person who's going to probably control the dialogue more. The power, who is more powerful in this dialogue, can be clearly made out by the reader, because the words, the discussion, the talk, the speech that they are using is clarifying to us that the person in red is far more powerful than the one in green. Okay, so that's one way of understanding dialogue. So when you are creating your characters and you want to create a character who's very, very strong in their opinions and is somebody very assertive, then you have to think of word choice or language that is going to be, depicting their character really well. The other thing that's really important is, of course, the choice of language. Now let's look at this example. The word choice in the dialogue also clarifies the relationship of the characters. So again, someone in red says, I'd like you to draft a formal report by the afternoon, Charla. And the answer is, yes, Miss Fiona. Can you tell me what relationship is there? What is that relationship there? What do these characters do? Can you make out from the dialogue? One is saying teacher and student, boss and employee. That's a very good catch. Miss Fiona is the boss. Your choice of language, what somebody says to another person, also determines the kind of relationship that they share. So this is how important dialogues are. You can clarify relationships, you can define the power dynamics there, you can engage dialogue to get people to understand the characters really well. Geographical setups, okay? This is very important because when we say we want to write a regional story, when in this competition, we are promoting regional stories. We are saying that try to write a story which covers this region, the Middle East region, or the UAE. If you're residing in the UAE, try to capture the culture, try to capture, the traditions, try to capture a story that talks about this place. So in that perspective, your dialogues can play an important role. Okay. Now, when you are creating dialogues, you have to keep these things in mind. Consider the background of the character. Okay, where does the character come from? Does he come from a rich family, a poor family? Is he somebody who's working in what kind of a profession do they have? What is their educational qualification? All of these things will determine the word choice. All of these things are going to help you create dialogues that are more relevant to your character. Then, of course, social positioning, like I said, are they, positioned well in society? Are they somebody very educated? Are they very rich? Are they very, influential in society? What is their positioning? Level of education, of course, if your character has never been to school, the way they talk to other people, the way they converse is going to be very different from a character in the story who is well educated and is very knowledgeable. Then, of course, your aspiration in life. If your character aspires to become a doctor or aspires to become a leader in future, that character's talk is going to be very different. It's going to be very inspirational. It's going to be very, motivated and encouraged. Compared or in contrast to a character who doesn't have very high aspirations about life, their talk and their, choice of words and language and dialogue is going to be very different. It's not going to be as excited about life. It's not going to be as positive about the future. So all of these things contribute towards creating powerful dialogues. Okay. The idea is to be true to the time period. Now, let's say that you're writing your story in the 2020. Okay. This whole year has been such a learning curve for all of us. So if your character is living in this time, the common things that they're going to talk about. Okay, let's have a quick chat. Okay, tell me, what are some of the things that your character would talk about if they were, part of the 2020 setup? COVID-19 for sure, the pandemic, yes, being stuck at home. They would talk about climate change. They would talk about technology. They would talk about job loss. Wow, well done. They would talk about quarantine. They would talk about lockdowns, safety. They would talk about e-learning. Well done. So proud of you guys. Sustainability Expo 2021. They're going to talk about Mars mission. Wow, good job, kids. They're going to talk about online classes, e-learning, safety, survival, very good, social distancing. They're going to talk about masks. Yes, story of our lives, masks, but we have to keep safe. And they're going to talk about the vaccine, the virus, quarantine. You guys got it, right? So language and what they're talking to and what's happening, what's relevant in a certain time period is very important to your story. You can't have somebody living in today's time talking about an era that happened or something that happened, the kind of environment we had like 50 years back. So it's not going to make relevance to your story. You have to stay very relevant to the time period in which your story is being written or your characters are being developed. So very well done on that. A character from the 1970s will sound differently from a character from 2020. It is because social, political, and linguistic influences experience changes with time. So this is another thing, for example, we're living here in the UAE, and if somebody has lived here for more than 30 years or has lived here for more than 50 years, they can tell you how the UAE has changed over the years. And with the changing time, a little bit of change comes through in your culture, it comes through in your language, it comes through in your linguistics, how you communicate with each other, whether you communicate in a formal way, whether you communicate in an informal language. All of these small elements come together to bring about minor changes over the years that you don't notice, but are happening all the time. Everything is evolving all the time. And that's why we always worry about preserving culture and preserving our language and preserving our heritage, because they need to be preserved if you want to create your uniqueness, if you want to, preserve your uniqueness. So all of these can come through your dialogues, because when you look around and see what kind of an environment do you live in, your characters are going to speak the same language. Okay? Yes, and it's quite interesting actually. Thank you. It's quite interesting actually that you have so much variety in the UAE. It's not just you, it's so many expatriates living in the UAE. You've got nationals, of course, you've got the nationals, and then you've got people from Turkey, you've got people from Pakistan, India, America, Germany, Italians, you've got every possible nationality living in the UAE. And so we have a very beautiful, inclusive, environment that the story can be written in. And the characters can be so diverse. You don't need to have just one kind of characters in your story. Your characters could be diverse. And that's what's going to bring out the beauty of this region, right? Use of deceptive dialogues. Wow, now that looks interesting. Deceptive dialogues. What are deceptive dialogues? Who are we trying to fool here? So here I just like to point out that it's really, really fun when the author, that is you, write a story in a way that the audience or the person who is reading the story knows the character more than the character themselves. Wow, that sounds confusing, but that is what we call creating subtext in dialogues. Okay, let's look at some of the examples here so this can become clear for you. It is very exciting for the reader to know that the characters' real motives are very different from what they are saying. Sometimes we do it as well. We say one thing, but we have another plan happening inside our heads. This is what we call creating subtext. Okay, let's share an example. When the reader knows that Kathy is a callous accomplice to the kidnapper in the story, they would feel the tension and nervousness reading Kathy's dialogues. Now imagine Kathy is a character in a story and she is very corrupt and she is the villain in the story, and she is actually planning to hijack or kidnap a child. And so on the outside, Kathy's dialogues are really nice. She's a sweet person, but inside, we as readers know that Kathy has different plans. Now look at the dialogue that Kathy is using. You are such a smart boy, Darren. I think Mr. Patrick will be thrilled to meet you. How about I give you a ride to his office right now? Now, the reader will feel the panic because inside their hearts, they're saying, oh no, Darren, don't go with Kathy because she has a different plan for you. But this is what is creating the excitement in the dialogue, that you know what Kathy plans, but the character in the story does not. In this case, the reader knows that Kathy has the intention to help Mr. Patrick kidnap Darren, and that is why she's praising him and offering to drive him there right at that moment. So it's a very crucial point in the story where this character is saying one thing, but actually has a more callous and a more, a very dangerous plan in place. This makes the dialogue very interesting. The reader gets actively involved in the situation. Now, when you write your story, creating characters who tend to think beyond the obvious, who tend to plan beyond the obvious, is an interesting trait that you can inculcate in your writing. Putting ideas there in your characters. If you create a negative character, maybe you can think of how they cover up their negativity. What is the curtain that they have? What kind of a mask do they wear to, hide their callousness or to hide their, the threat that they pose to the characters in the story? That's an interesting way of creating a character as well, is that the dialogues that they use are very kind, very polite, but inside they're just the opposite. They're very unkind and they're very harsh. So that's an interesting way of creating subtext. So remember, this strategy is called creating subtext. So the text is there, what they say is one thing, but the subtext is the meaning that lies behind that text, which is contrary or opposite to what they are trying to say. Engaging humor, engaging sarcasm. I just cannot tell you how many stories I've read that I've just read because the dialogues were made so memorable because of the humor they carried, the satire they carried, or the sarcasm they carried. So you can absorb your reader by writing, dialogues that are really full, that are full of wit, that are full of comic sense, that are full of, things that children can relate to. So remember, your audience, of course, is children. Children are going to be reading your stories. So more than you, you are the best person to decide what kind of things are kids laughing at today? What kind of things do kids find funny? And you could create that kind of humor through your characters using your dialogues. So again, I've shared a little bit of a little example here. Ghazal rolled her eyes and clapped. This is so exciting. So when somebody is rolling their eyes and when they are being sarcastic, it makes the whole situation very comic and very, funny for the children to read. In the above example, we know Ghazal rolling her eyes clearly indicates that she isn't looking forward to the event, and her clapping and dialogue show that she's being sarcastic and taunting, okay? So humor and sarcasm are strong tools. Kids, I'll say this again and again. You don't want to write a preachy story. You don't want to write a story that you are always just telling the character what to do. You want to write a story that has a lot of humor in it, and kids laugh, but at the same time learn through it, okay? How many of you enjoy comic stories? How many of you enjoy writing stories that are really funny? I think in general, kids love, witty stories. And dialogues are like, you can say so much. That's what we call one-liners. One-liners in a story are, that one line, that one piece of dialogue that you remember from a story because it made so much sense. So I really want you to think about, how you can make, when your character wants to say something, especially if it's difficult to digest, if it's something that is truth, and truth normally is difficult to digest for people, what is a fun way of saying it? What is a witty way of saying it that people can laugh, but at the same time truly get the message there? So when you're writing your dialogues, you can keep that in mind for sure. Okay, all right, we move on. Text, subtext, and context. Now, this again is really, really important for you to understand because a good dialogue is made up of these three things. It says what it wants to say. It clearly indicates the intention of the person who's saying it. What do they mean by it exactly? And in what context are they saying it? The reader should be able to understand what the character is saying and in what context is this relevant, okay? So we can understand text, subtext through this example that I've shared with you on the screen. Text is what the character says, okay? It is the surface layer. Now imagine that the earth has many surfaces, right? The outer surface is the crust. And you can imagine that, the text in a story is what the person is saying. So they might be saying, we're taking Karen's car. This is information that's coming through the character. So it's just on the surface. This is what they are saying. Now, the subtext is the intention. Why are they saying it? Okay, so let's read on the second part, which says, we're taking Karen's car since we need to pick up Greg. And we know just how much Karen loves helping out her friends. Now here, a little bit of intention is added in. And you kind of wonder as a reader, what do they mean when they say that we all know how much Karen loves helping her friends? Is there a context to it? If you will not add the context to it, the person reading will not understand the significance of this sentence. They will not understand the dialogue fully. But when you add the context, which is you create the worldview, which you create the opinion that's there, it gives it complete meaning. So this as a whole dialogue would make more meaning. We're taking Karen's car since we need to pick up Greg, and we know just how much Karen loves helping out her friends. We haven't forgotten how she ditched Oliver on the roadside because his sandwich would mess up her black leather car seats. So now this clearly shows that, of course, this person is taunting Karen, Because Karen is probably somebody, okay, why should I tell you that? Why don't you tell me that? What does this tell you about Karen? Can anyone tell me the character of Karen? If somebody is saying this about Karen, that, we're taking Karen's car because we need to pick up Greg, and we just know how much she loves helping out her friends. We haven't forgotten how she ditched, somebody on the roadside because their sandwich would mess up her leather seats. What does this tell you about Karen? She's arrogant, she's mean, she's selfish. Karen is a name, my dear. She's rude, she's bossy, she's mean, she's impolite, she's fussy. That's a good choice of word. She's miserly, she's harsh, not caring. She's possessive about her things, absolutely. She is rude, she's greedy. I don't know if she's greedy, my dear. She is a clean freak, yes. So she loves her things to be spick and span. She's probably a perfectionist. A dialogue can say a lot about a character, but it will only say or tell you things about a character when you add in the text, the subtext, and the context. So try to write dialogues that are complete. Try to write dialogues that give away a little bit more than what you want to say. You just don't want to have, sentences that are declarative in nature. You want to create sentences that are, that have intrigue in them, that want your readers to find out a little more about the character or try to imagine what the character is like, okay? Eavesdropping on conversations is a really fun way to develop dialogue. Now, remember, what that does is when people are talking in normal life, in ordinary, day-to-day things, when you are sitting at a cafe and you see people are talking, that's when they are that's the most informal exchange of language, okay? And when you're writing dialogues and you want to relate to children and you want to write a story for children, you want it to be as real as possible. What would somebody say in real life? You're not creating a character that's prim and proper unless the character is like that. But of course, you're going to try your best to make the conversation authentic and genuine. And to do that, you can, sometimes we're just standing there, we're not listening to the conversation, but we tend to come up with, people having a conversation, you wonder what they're talking about. So here's a strategy that you can use. What you can do is just think you are standing in a queue to order your food. The two people in front of you are talking and you happen to listen to their conversation. Listen to the conversation. Now, let's create this scenario. Person A is saying, to be honest, it just wasn't fair. Person B says, I don't know. She did know about the consequences. It's not like she didn't know about the consequences. And then A says, yeah, well, I still feel it was not fair on her. Now, you've only listened to this part of the conversation and you have absolutely no clue what they are referring to. But if you take this conversation and create context and create subtext, you can actually create a really interesting piece of, dialogue, or you can create a really interesting scene in a story. Now, let's imagine that this is what you've just heard. You've heard two random people standing in a queue talking, saying, I don't think it was fair. And the other person saying, well, in a lot of ways, she did know what was going to happen. So it's not like she didn't know. And still this person is pressing that, no, it's still unfair. Can you think of a scenario? Can you think of a scenario why they feel that way? Can you think of what might have gone wrong there? If you think about it, conversations are all about, real life situations. So this would also be a real life situation where something has happened to someone and one person thinks it's fair, one person thinks it's unfair. So it could be any situation related to that. So imagine you are in a public space like a cafe or a restaurant and you overhear the following conversation. Friend X says, I don't get it. Why would he do that? It was least expected of him. And friend Y says, exactly. And that too when everyone was watching. I mean, it was the peak hour and the restaurant was full. Now you just heard X and Y share this conversation. I want you to create context around this conversation and around the words spoken and create a short scene for me, okay? Now, I've given you some thinking points there. Who are the characters? So you can give them names. Who are they talking about? You can create another character. And what do you think happened? You know, what makes dialogues memorable is what is attached to that dialogue. It's either a lifelong learning one-liner that's put into the dialogue. It might be an experience that is very relevant to the reader. It might be catchy words. It might be an idea that's very, that's very striking for the reader. There are so many things, emotional attachment to it. All of this adds up to creating memorable dialogues. Your motivation from now on needs to come from this. It has to come from this, okay? This is what you want to achieve at the end of this year, okay? You do want your story to come into this anthology, and it's not impossible. The kids who are here made an effort. They put the learning to use. That's why when I say, participate with a purpose, this is exactly what I mean when I say participate with a purpose. Okay, but thank you very much for attending. Please encourage your friends to attend as well. These are free webinars and you're getting, a lot of help with it. Please do fill in the little survey that pops up right after we finish it. It gives us feedback and it helps me improve the content for you, okay? Thank you very much, kids. Have a safe week. Bye-bye.